right, so welcome to our webinar about the All In Community COVID-19 Pandemic Grant Information Session. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to take us through kind of how to apply for the grant, what some of the initiatives may be. I'll give some examples of what we might be looking for as far as a grant. One of the things that you need to know about this grant is that usually with All In Community grants, we do capacity building, which means that we look for ways for you to be sustainable, have a plan that is more sustainable, and therefore it doesn't really exhaust the grant funding with direct service opportunities. But we felt in the unprecedented times, because we know we have folks that are returning from prison at a time when the social safety net and a lot of the systems that help people return more successfully have kind of been withdrawn as our system, the people working in our systems are working remotely. You know, if you watch the governor's thing yesterday, you know that the Job and Family Services, the Ohio Means Jobs piece of that, filing for unemployment, is just overwhelmed. So a lot of our systems that normally work relatively well, there are of course, you know, issues with all of them, but those that are designed to work under normal circumstances are simply overwhelmed. And so we felt that instead of allocating funding for, say, new initiatives that are more capacity building and helping us respond long term, we felt that we would focus some of our funding toward responding now in very specific ways with some direct services. So all of that in mind, a couple of things I just want to go over about the grant, and then we will work on some questions. Okay. So just first, the All In Community mission is to restore hope and provide healing in lives involved in the criminal justice system. And this grant very much falls in line with that because of our current circumstances. Hope and healing are two things that need to be more present in our communities, and particularly with those that are involved in the criminal justice system. We have folks that are being released now as the governor, as they're trying to reduce the prison population. We're going to see more people released than are normally done. And but yet we still have those that are coming home, you know, hundreds that are being released every single day simply because of time served or because of parole or where they currently sit in the system. So we have those that are getting released early based on certain circumstances, and then those that are just being released because that's what was scheduled for them. But whenever we think about writing a grant or using the grant funding, we want to make sure that hope, restoring hope and providing healing are still the underlying foundation for this work. Also, a couple principles that I want you to be aware of with All In Community are these two things: that we do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. So when you're thinking about writing this grant, what we want to see happen is that you have a particular group. It's because this work can be very overwhelming, and we could say we want to provide direct services to returning neighbors, but we don't mean all of them. We want you to kind of really figure out in your community who is it, the one or two populations or the one or two people that we feel that we are being called to work with at this time. And that dovetails into the second principle of develop ministry based on co-mission and co-location. We do not want to see direct services to be done in isolation. Now is the time when the community should be working together, and we believe that the church should be right in there working based on, you know, co-mission and co-location work. So those are two principles that we want to see kind of highlighted in any kind of grant proposal that you present. So why this response? Why the grant? Why the response at this time? And because we think that scripturally, you know, in Acts 4, this is the whole beginning and birth of the church, where, you know, hope-filled faith is made known whenever they brought everything they had and they shared, they sold what they had and they gave it to those in need. So, making our hope-filled faith known by sharing with the most vulnerable, we believe advances the gospel message and advances the kingdom. Then facilitating healing by helping name the collective fears within a community of faith. 2 Corinthians is when Paul goes to Macedonia and he writes back to the church in Corinth and said that there was fear, that there were challenges on the outside and fear on the inside, because he was being known, right, as a rebel rouser, as somebody that communities were finding to be threatening, much like returning citizens. In fact, he'd spent some time already in the criminal justice system. So, in expressing his fears to the church, and the church anticipated that, because in this passage, they send Titus as a companion for him, and that brought him great joy. So we believe that if we can, as a community of faith, express that, hey, we understand that there are these fears and we're not shying away from them. We're leaning into them and we are providing this healing presence for you during this time. And then whenever we're throughout scripture, particularly Paul, proclaiming the gospel message through the justice involved disciples over and over. If you've been involved in this work for very long and you've had the blessing to walk with somebody who found their faith or rediscovered their faith in prison, whenever they return and are supported by a faith community, the gospel message just spreads through them. And so we want to continue to do that work through these grants. And then fueling hope and healing with sustained support. We want the relationships that are developed through direct service to be transformative and not transactional. So, and that requires the sustained support. And I think we can all agree that this COVID-19 pandemic has really made us take a hard look at what future may look like and how recovery is going to be slow. And so we need to be prepared and in relationship and leveraging our resources and our relationship to be sustainable throughout the recovery period of the pandemic. So who are we for? Who's this grant going to be working to sustain? It'll be returning neighbors, and those are our people returning to the community following a period of incarceration. So local jail ministries could be a pathway for year one, right? State prison ministries could be a pathway for year one. Ministries that you may have already been engaged with, like Kindway Embark, which works within the Central Ohio area. Welcome Home for Life Network, which Jeff Daniels is on our call today. But they work with life builders inside the institutions, and their folks are returning to all over West Ohio. If you're part of a life builders team, those folks will be coming back as well. So part of it is looking at where are you currently touching and in relationship with returning neighbors, and those, and they are reaching back, and there are people that are following that similar pathway, and so this grant could be used to help them. Families of the incarcerated is the other population that we want to see the grants be used to help with. And those are spouses or partners, children, caregivers of children in your community. Those of us who have been in this work for a while know that a lot of time grandparents or aunts and uncles, extended family, are raising the children of an incarcerated parent. So those are families, and some of the connections that I've listed up here. Angel Tree, we had a webinar last week and talked about how, if you were an Angel Tree church this last year, those folks are really vulnerable right now, and you can continue to connect with those families and perhaps use this grant to help, supplement some of their income if they, or childcare or things like that. And we'll get into more what the grant will be used for. If you have food pantries, more likely than not, if you're serving folks through your food pantry, you're serving folks that have been incarcerated or have family members that are incarcerated. Freedom Schools, which, you know, who knows what that's going to look like this year, but if you've been a supporter of a Freedom School in the past, those families again are really, really vulnerable. That might be a way for you to work with a Freedom School to support the families currently. Legal services, some of our churches provide legal services or a legal service, a mobile legal service agency to come. And then jail and prison ministry. So in this opportunity, we want you to think about what relationships do you currently have within the community and with folks that are incarcerated, and how can you then come alongside them in a really tangible way. So what type of responses are we looking for in our grants? Grant recipients will be selected based on a couple of things. Demonstrated collaborative efforts within the community. One of the criteria for this grant is that we want to see a partnership between your efforts and another local church. And it doesn't have to be a Methodist church. It could be a different denomination or faith group, but another community of faith, and then either a nonprofit or a service provider or an agency within your local community. So you'll have two different partners working in a collaborative way. Direct services, the type of response is direct services for returning neighbors or families. I kind of just went over that, and we'll talk. And by direct services, we mean that this grant can be used to pay for rent, to supplement rent costs, food, fees for things like court fees or driver license fees, things that can help people get in a position to where they can be employed or can have different income coming in as we go through this recovery. Housing is another thing, employment, or technology, even technology services. Cell phones for folks that are returning are incredibly important, particularly now, because with everybody working remotely, they have to have a way to connect with, say, their parole officer. And if they don't have a phone, they don't have a way to connect. So, you know, there's always this tiling effect of things like those. So think of the direct services that maybe are not being provided in your community, or that are being provided but not to a level that's really going to make a significant impact. The other part of the grant is the integration of wellness, resiliency, and healing. Again, it's not about just providing this one-time shot in the arm for folks. It is about their overall wellness and resiliency, and how can my direct service through this grant really help somebody get on the path to healing, either physically or emotionally, mentally, spiritually, those kind of things. So, it will be some way a short, not necessarily a one and done, but how can the funding through this grant be used to launch people into that next thing, so that the intended outcome from your direct service doesn't have to be, oh, they're healed, or, oh, they're stable now. That's not what we're looking for, but the long term, it keeps them going in that direction. And then, of course, adherence to governmental coronavirus community protection orders and guidelines. We must follow the social distancing, which sometimes comes with additional funding needs, right? So we definitely want you to not go out and go against what is required to stop the pandemic from spreading, and also that ultimately would lead to less healing and resiliency within your community. So we have those things to consider. So initiative outcomes: removal of reentry barriers. So whatever your direct service is, it should facilitate two of the three outcomes. You can do all three, but two of the three. Removal of reentry barriers with housing, employment, job readiness, fees, we've kind of gone over that. Strengthening of justice-involved families' ability to recover from this, from economic, social, and relational impact of the pandemic. And then a third thing would be an increased awareness just among the church and community members of the vulnerabilities and challenges facing justice-involved populations during the pandemic. We hope that for many of you that the additional funding and the way that you use it will help your members and your community to we hope that it will bring out into the open the real challenges that are happening with these two populations at this time. So those are the two, and again, the grant must facilitate at least 2 of the 3 outcomes. So just some basics about it. The grant initiative must have an identified leader and implementation team. It doesn't have to be this massive team, but if you follow the guidelines with 1 community partner and 1 church partner, then that could be your team of 3. So it's not about getting this massive group on Zoom and figuring out how to do this, but you need an identified leader and an implementation team, so you're not doing it alone. An anticipated timeline, best guess, you don't have to have that nailed down. A budget worksheet is really important as well. That's just a good practice for grants. And within the document I'm going to show you in a little bit, there is a budget template, so you can kind of see what we're talking about with that. And then a willingness to serve as a resource guide for other ministry initiatives across West Ohio. We like to capture how things have worked, and then the learning lessons, I guess, from this, and so that if groups want to continue to respond in this way, or if a new group decides that they want to respond, then we could say, hey, I'm not sure what that looks like in your context or what your relationships are, but here's a church over here who did something similar, and you'd be willing to work with that group to get them started. And then submit 1 progress report and 1 final report with an itemized budget. We want to see just how the money was spent. There's no judgment on that, but just want to see how that money was spent. The application window over there is April 20th through the October 30th. And then whenever you apply and whenever that grant is awarded, then the grant must be pretty much used within 6 months of that award. So you can wait for a little bit until August, September to see kind of how things are rolling out, how social distancing measures are being relaxed before you would apply for a grant. So that's why we gave that window. Grant funds, though, may not exceed first $3,000 is the cap per initiative. So let's say you do an initiative now for $3,000, and then you expend you expend your funds within a couple months based on how that forms. Then you could come back and reapply for another one for a more long-term recovery type grant. But each grant application can only be up to $3,000. Then, and also it cannot be used to pay for salaries, facility repairs, maintenance upgrades, permanent furnishings, and oh, we want to do this grant and we want to provide, distance learning for a group of students in a particular class, but we need to go buy 50 laptops. Well, yeah, that's probably not going to, the grant funding probably will not be approved for that kind of thing. But, permanent furnishings or facility utility costs, those we anticipate the church itself should be able to cover on their own. So there's that. So then the application process, you complete the grant application and email it back to me at that address right there. And in the application, it has signatures for your partners, and an email confirmation from them is okay. You don't, again, because of social distancing, when I was kind of putting this together, I was like, well, how are they going to get the signatures of the folks that they're partnering with. So just an email confirmation saying that, that we have read this, that we're in partnership, and this is going to be what we're going to be doing in this partnership together, and we are excited about the opportunity. Just something like that. And so they can email me, that kind of thing. Again, the deadline is October 30th. And once I receive an application, then we're going to do an in-person or a video conference review of the grant application within 1 week of receiving it, because we want to get this out as quickly as possible. And then you'll know within the week of the interview that whether or not it's been approved or modified or whatever. And then response letters will be sent out to each applicant via email instead of snail mail. So then half of the approved grant funds will be dispersed upon approval. And I wanted to change that. I didn't get a chance to change that. Upon approval means that I will then send the request up to the conference office, which, as you might anticipate, they are working remotely. So it may be a week or two before it is actually processed, depending on when the request is made, because they're only doing those, I think, once a week at this point. So it may be a couple of weeks before you actually get the funds, is all I'm saying. But the recommendation and the request will be made at the time of approval. And then the second half of the grants will be dispersed upon completion of a midpoint progress report. And so when you are approved, then I will send you the progress report as well, so you can just hold that. And as soon as probably half your funds are dispensed, we'll kind of call that midpoint. And then you can submit your progress report and get the other half of your funding. Then a final impact report will be required at the end of the designated grant cycle. So you set the grant cycle. That's one thing I didn't really cover, is you set that cycle. If you say we need $3,000, this is our initiative, we anticipate it's going to take a couple weeks for our initiative to happen, then that's kind of what we base that on. But you have up to 6 months for your cycle to be completed. And then churches may apply for a second round of funding, and I've kind of already gone over that. And then the grant application and guidelines will be available on the West Ohio Conference website. It's actually under our All In Community tab, and under that web page, there's a thing called Grants. There's a tab called Grants and Giving, and it will be placed there. But because you're on this webinar today, I will send directly to you the application and the guidelines. So you don't really have to worry about that, but that's just for future reference. So I'm going to just do a couple, 3 examples, not a couple, but I guess 3 examples of what an initiative might look like using this grant funding. So let's say that you are a church and you're like, you know what, we've got several folks that are coming back and we need to provide safe housing for our returning neighbors. And so we anticipate, based on numbers, we anticipate, 5 or 6 of those returning within this period of the pandemic and all that. So one thing we might want to figure out first is we might want to contact our parole officer, which with All In Community, we can help make that happen. So contact the parole officer, because if they're out on parole, the parole officer might be able to provide some supplemental housing assistance with that. And they might have a location so that you're not left trying to figure out where they're going to go. So that might be one of our partners in this. The second partner might be a local landlord or hotel. If we have somebody in our congregation that owns or manages a hotel or owns or manages rental property, maybe they will be a partner with us and do it at a reduced rate so that we can help more folks and we can use our grant funding in that way. And then we're going to have a church partner that, if a person's returning, they usually don't have a lot of clothing. They don't have towels. They don't have personal care items. So we're going to tap into our local church partner to help us with clothing and care items. And then, we might also, within our own congregation, because we are using our funds to provide the housing piece of this, but we might, have a landlord that has an empty apartment. So we might tap into our congregation to see if we can provide the furniture as part of our congregational contribution to this effort. So that's kind of just one basic example of how the funding could be used for direct services. Another one would be providing families of an incarcerated, like if we have Angel Tree families and we contact them, they're like, we're just really having to stretch our grocery budget. So we can provide families grocery support, and we can provide that through gift cards, so that we are good stewards of our grant funding. But then also we could contact a church partner for a food pantry and maybe do some supplemental things and stretch those grant dollars a little bit further, and they can provide some of the basic food and food needs for that. But then a lot of the time our food pantries don't have fresh produce. So is there a nonprofit or another church partner that does a fresh produce giveaway every so often? And maybe we can contact them and have them set aside some care, quote unquote, care packages for these Angel Tree families that we're working with. And then a lot of the time, if you have fresh produce and a food pantry, but sometimes there's not really the proteins that are the perishable proteins, the meats, the milks, the eggs, those kind of things that those families need. So we're going to go to our church and we're going to ask and see if there's some church groups that would be willing to provide that in supplement of the grant, to help supplement the grant dollars as well. And then sometimes, our families, as the restrictions roll back, they want to do their own grocery shopping with the gift card that we provide them. Or they have young children that could be going to childcare, but because of lack of income, they can't provide that at that time, and that would alleviate it. And particularly if the childcare provides a meal for that child. So, we might actually talk with the childcare provider and see if we can't do a special offering within our congregation to provide some supplemental cost, or we can say some of our grant funding is going to shift and go to provide that childcare cost, but we want to establish that relationship with them as well. So, and then my final example is fees for services, whether it be transportation of getting my driver's license back, reducing my child care fees, providing fees. I don't know if you all are aware, but when folks, as restrictions ease on social distancing and our folks that are coming back on parole meet with their parole officers in person, then they have to provide a fee. They have to pay a fee of about $20. So you might use your grant dollars to supplement that for them so that they can remain out on parole and can continue to move forward. Just an FYI, for now, all parole fees are suspended to help folks in this recovery effort. But let's say that gets reinstated during this time period. Then one of the things that you might want to do is, so that they don't have to continue to need grant funding, we're going to work with a nonprofit or an agency that does education and employment. So that when they come to us and say, hey, I really need to get my driver's license back. Okay, do you have a job? Well, not yet. Okay, so here's a group that we're working with to make this a more seamless transition. We're willing to help you get your driver's license back. But we also want to see you talking and making steps toward your own employment. Or we can also say, and if they go, well, I need to get online and apply for things. Well, do we have a church partner that can provide some tech support with that if we don't have that capability ourselves? And then, usually folks that need help with fees need help with just basic needs. And that's where that other church partner can come in and help provide those kind of things. So those are just three of the examples that I came up with, that I've seen and worked with our churches, but in previous opportunities, and are now I know are stressing our systems as they are. And so that's kind of the end of my presentation with this. And again, here's where you can find that information, but I'm going to stop sharing now. And see, do we have any questions, or do you want to look at the actual application itself at this point in time? So let me unmute people and unmute all. So I'm going to just unmute everyone. If you've muted yourself, you'll have to do that. But thoughts, questions, comments this time?
I had a question on the partnerships. I don't know that we work with anyone right now, another church, but we do, we're with Kindway and have been involved with them for a couple years, maybe 3. So could it be a new partnership that we partnered with another church that is already doing it for a grant, or does it have to be an established partnership?
It does. No, you can seek out a new partner. Absolutely. So if Chris is actually on our thing today, if Chris says, you know what, we've got 5 guys coming back, and here's where some of the big gaps are, can you all supplement that? And then you guys could look at that and go, yeah, we could do that. But we also know there's a church down the street that could also help with that may not even be connected with Kindway. But you just know them, you know what they do in that area. And so, yeah, so you could go to them and say, hey, we're getting some grant funds and we're going to be working with these folks. And we just want to know, in your food pantry, can you set aside for us just, you know, some go packs of groceries? And this is kind of what we'd be looking for. So, yeah.
Okay.
Reba, this is Teresa.
Yes.
So if you are going to use the money for housing plus also food pantry things, you definitely need to keep track of how many is going towards the actual returning incarcerated person. So that's why you said, like, we would have so many go packs set aside so that that's not mixed in with just the normal
Correct
community.
Yeah.
Okay. Then also, unfortunately, we don't really have a prison ministry going now, but we have seen an increased amount of people getting out of our local jail that are looking for housing as well. We do have a Haven of Hope that's been trying to get a homeless shelter here, and they've come up against some community I don't know.
Opposition?
Yeah. Yes. And they're putting people at hotels. Would they be able to be a partner with us for us to use some of that grant funding for housing for those people who are getting
Yes.
released?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so let me just quickly, I'm trying to see what time it is, make sure I'm not holding everybody. So let me share kind of the grant itself. Oh, let's see, which one is this? Here we go. So here's the, yeah. So I'm going to share the grant application with you. The grant guidelines are basically what I had in the PowerPoint. They're just presented differently in the guidelines. So here's the application, and just kind of some of the basic stuff that we need to know. And then down here it's like list the contacts for partnering churches or community organizations you're working with. So again, you can have more than one and one. And I would even dare say, if you have a church that has developed some pretty robust reentry or family support systems, we would even consider 2 churches as opposed to a church and a community organization. So you just kind of list those out and who they are, and then you summarize kind of your action plan of how you're going to roll out, how you're going to use your funding, kind of just your anticipated number of folks that you might be thinking you would be serving, so that you're just not kind of making things up without understanding your context, I guess. So that's kind of the second piece of that. And then explain kind of where your responsibility is going to fall within that action plan. So in the action plan itself, it's like, we're going to be doing this piece, and this is the organization that's going to be kind of working on this, so that the church is not left to do all the heavy lifting. And I will say, particularly when we work with agencies and some of our organizations, they will want to pull you in to their lane. And so you'll have to have some pretty strong boundaries about, here's what we can do, and here's how we will do that in conjunction with what you are already doing. So you have to be pretty clear about what your responsibility is going to be. And then, you know, how will you engage with available community assets that are contributing to the healing and the restorative ministry efforts that are going on in the community. So Jan, that kind of goes to your question of getting a new partner. You might find that at the end of the day, you're going to have several new partners that come out of this, and that's great.
Okay.
We just wanted to make sure that the church does not assume this role within the community of, oh, we are going to be the place that everybody has to come to get this thing, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to see it go out as opposed to drawing people in to us. And then explain how the action plan will support successful reentry. You just need to give some thought to and have some good basic level understanding of, yeah, this is really a need that folks have at this particular time, and where your lane is. These questions are really to help you narrow down, establish boundaries, establish responsibility, and narrow down your one. Doing for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And then how will you continue? We would love to see you continue to develop the collaborative relationships once the pandemic things kind of start to ease out. And we hope at the end of the day that several of our grant recipients will continue to do this work in new ways, because we are going to have to do ministry in new ways going forward. Even the other night I woke up, I thought, you know, our churches are spaciously equipped to help different organizations be able to do case management using social distancing guidelines. So if you ever have been to a Job and Family Services, if you've ever been to several of these nonprofit groups in your community, their space is very small. And so like training, they don't have the space to do social distance training on site. But our churches have these beautiful sanctuaries that are most of them are pretty spacious. And so could you offer your space, right, as a place for a group to come and do some training that's valuable and important and needs to be done, but you have to maintain those social distancing guidelines. So you'll find that, I hope that you'll have different partners and you'll be partnering in different and new and innovative ways. And then the budget worksheet, which we're going to get to below, that you can use. You don't have to use it if you have your own. If your church has its own way of doing budgeting that anybody could understand, then feel free to do that. It's just, I used it. I just made it available because some people don't have that readily on hand for them. And then here's the signature page. And like I said, you could do this all via email if you so desire. But here's kind of a budget template. And this is an example of, you know, we're going to do 50 bags of groceries or 50 go packs or 50 maybe learning things at $3 each. $3 was a little, I mean, that was just a made up number. And then, you know, the total cost is going to be $150. But, you know, Buckeye Health, our healthcare groups, they are very happy to donate certain things. And so, you know, you could contact Buckeye Health and say, we need 50 bags to provide returning citizens when they get out to hold their stuff in, so they could do that kind of stuff. And then that's just kind of a basic budget template. Let me stop sharing that one, but let me share a different one that has, here we go. This is the guidelines, but down here I kind of made up some budgets all the way down. So let's say that you want to provide Go Packs for folks that are returning through Kindway Embark or through Welcome Home for Life Network. And you get 50 bags at $3 each. Buckeye Health is going to provide that for you. They need a 5-pack of underwear and a 5-pack of socks. That's 100 of those at $10 each. Each pack's about $10. That's $1,000. You could do a congregation drive for supplies for that, so you wouldn't have to use your grant funding. 3 full sets of clothing with shoes. You could do, your partnering church may have a clothing closet. So you could ask them, hey, can you set aside, we've got these people coming home. We know their sizes because we're working with these 2 other organizations. Can you please provide the clothing for them? Cell phone. So you decide, hey, this is something where we're going to spend $2,000 of our grant funding, and we're going to supplement Welcome Home for Life Network's packs where they provide, you know, some of the cell phones. So 2,000 of our dollars are going to go there. But then we got this hygiene products that folks need in their packs. So a local business is going to donate those. And then a 2-night hotel stay, we're going to give $1,000 of our funding to go and help supplement that work with the Lucas County Office of Reentry and the Welcome Home for Life Network. And so our total initiative is about $13,400, but our $3,000 we're going to use for cell phones and for hotels, because we feel that that's going to really keep people moving forward in a more sustainable way. So that's kind of one example. And then this is if we're going to work with a group that works with families, and we're going to do groceries. But we're going to do, you know, we figure the, you know, 10 families, 4 weeks, $300 per week. That's $12,000. But our area churches and our church partner, All In Community Church, UMC, we're going to do some of that through food pantry donations. But then these families might need basic internet services as well for educational things, for applying for jobs. Who knows? There's a plethora of things that a lot of our vulnerable families could use technology to be more sustainable going forward, or help in their recovery efforts. So we're going to do $2,000 in grants to help with basic internet services for those families. And then we're going to do some one-on-one remote learning and tutoring. Hey, we've got computers and we've got tutors, and we can do that for free. And then transportation to these remote learning sites. Our partner, the Ridge Project, they're going to provide that because they've got vans and they've got a system in place to make that happen. But then we kind of look at, gosh, you know, a lot of these families, they want to be sustainable, but they don't have, you know, car breaks down, or there's some kind of transportation issue of getting to and from work. We're going to give $1,000 for that. And then we're going to use some church funds as well. And then back to school supplies, we could do a supply drive with some area churches and take care of that. So this whole initiative may be this more wraparound of groceries and providing internet services and even some educational opportunities. That's about $20,000, and our grant's going to, you know, we're going to use $3,000 toward some of those things. So, thoughts, ideas, questions, comments? Anyone? Chris, do you have any thoughts? And Jeff, you know, because you guys represent community partners as well. Do you see where this could be of value to you all?
I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I plan to take it back to my team to see, because we have a pretty good network of church partners, and we have most of them are in the United Methodist Church network. So I think that we will reach out to them. It's really challenging because we're not going into prisons, but we still have people coming out. We're still doing parole hearings via teleconference with our participants. So it hasn't stopped the flow out at all. In fact, it's probably going to get sped up because they're releasing some nonviolent offenders. So,
Right.
There's definitely a need, and I need to really think and process this. But it's been very, very helpful, Reba, and I appreciate the conference doing this.
You're welcome. Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts?
I think this is really thorough, Reba. I'm impressed by the process, and I think you've laid this out. I think the grant application is good. There is a discrepancy in that grant applications. In one place it says $4,000.
Oh,
The other places it says $3,000. Okay,
well, I'll
just
make
point
that
that
change.
out. Yeah, that change needs to be made. But I think this is a great partnering opportunity. I think the examples are good. I think partnering is necessary. It's not an option in this situation and in this environment, as we've all learned, especially when you're dealing with multiple institutions. And so the question then becomes, how we bring those partners to the table,
Right.
and how we bring them in. Certainly we can't do this, what we've proposed to do, or we don't have a formal proposal, but what we've been talking about and what we've been doing has pretty much been restricted to CCI, with a few guys coming out from other institutions. So I think, if we're going to formalize this, we're going to have more formal partners in this. And if this grant initiative does anything, it may bring those partners together, not just for now, but for the future. So I think it's great effort.
Great. Yeah. Yep. That's the end goal is we can respond now. But what we don't want to see happen is that when things get back to quote unquote normal, which they won't ever be normal again, in the same way that we have prior to this, that we will have groups established, partnerships established, where then you can really start working longer term on things. Any leaders, churches have any comments or thoughts or questions? Great. So if I could get everybody to, in the chat box, ooh, I actually have a chat. Ooh, better check that out. Oh, yep. Nancy says, app says 4,000, not 3,000. Thank you, Nancy. So that I can email directly you all, and I can email you this presentation as well.
That'd be great.
So I'll email you the presentation. I'll email you the applications and the grant guidelines. If each of you could go into the chat box and name and email address that you want me to send it to, that would be really helpful. And I can capture those after we stop recording, and which I'm going to stop right now. And I can capture those and send those out to you. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.